Hey guys, Richard Holdner here, and welcome to the channel. You know I like spending time at junkyards, and when I go there looking for a big block Chevy, I normally pick the Gen 6 motor. 4-bolt main, hydraulic roller cam, standard size oval port heads. But hey, what about the Gen 5 peanut port big block? In this video, I'm going to show you all kinds of information on the Gen 5 peanut port big block 454 Chevy. First, I'm going to show you what happened when we went to the junkyard and got a stock motor. Then when we added a camshaft. Then we're going to compare it and see what happens if you would have just got the Gen 6 motor with a camshaft. But most importantly, I'm going to show you what happens when we upgraded the Gen 5 motor with ported peanut port heads, a bigger camshaft, and more compression. Then we're going to finish things off with replacing the peanut port heads with aftermarket heads and an even bigger camshaft. Let's get going. Normally when I go to Wreck Yard and select a big block Chevy, we normally try to look for the Gen 6 stuff. It's a later version. It's an upgrade for the Gen 5 peanut port stuff, the one with the throttle body injection on it. Now we're just going to tear the throttle body injection off, and we usually take the fuel injection off of the Gen 6 stuff too and put a simple carburetor on them when we run them on the engine dyno. It's a lot easier. I have videos up, at least with the Gen 6, running the factory fuel injection because we've done that many times. The thing is, it's limiting and it's in terms of power potential, and a lot of big block guys are kind of carbureted guys anyway, so that's normally the way that we go. But I want to show that the Gen 5 also has potential, and so we're going to take a look at that, complete with the peanut port heads, and I want to show you what kind of power we get with that, and then how we can take that basically to the next level. So what I did was went to the wrecking yard, found a Gen 5 throttle body injected motor. We took the throttle body injection off and ran it on the engine dyno. Now we run this with no accessories, with long tube headers. In this case, we ran it with a dual plane intake manifold and the 750 Holley carburetor. This was a YN dual plane, an 8019, and we had our long tube headers on MSD distributor that we run in stock trim. This is a low compression, mild stock flat tappet cam, and of course the peanut port heads. Now the YN intake that we use was not designed to work with peanut port heads. They were designed to work with standard oval port heads, but even that mismatch is not terribly bad. It didn't seem to hurt power too much. Run in this manner the Gen 5 big block, the otherwise stock big block with the carbureted induction system on it, made 334 horsepower and 448 foot-pounds of torque. And here's what happened when we made the first of our upgrades to it. We basically put a camshaft in it, and you can see we picked up a pretty fair bit of power. The camshaft in it was a comp cam. It was an extreme energy. It was a 256. So we were looking for low speed torque and the kind of thing that this is the kind of cam that you would put in even if you just had throttle body injection in it, because it's mild enough to use with the factory ECU. It was a 480/485 lift split. It was a 212, 218 degree duration split and 110 degree lobe separation angle. And here are the gains. We went from 334 horsepower up to 380 foot-pounds, or 380 horsepower. Torque went from 448 foot-pounds up to 484 foot-pounds. So it did pretty well. But to put this into perspective on what's going on here, even with our cammed Gen 5, here is a stock or a carbureted Gen 6 version. And you can see our cammed Gen 5 is making a little bit more than the stock Gen 6, although not a lot. So really, if you're going to the wrecking yard, this is kind of why we choose the Gen 6 with the better standard size oval port heads, the hydraulic roller cam, and it seems to work a little bit better. Obviously, it's not quite up to what the cammed version is, but here's what happens when we put a camshaft in the Gen 6 motor. It's making quite a bit more. This was a little bit bigger cam than we had in the Gen 5, but that's not going to save the Gen 5. 428 horsepower and over 500 foot-pounds of torque, 515 foot-pounds of torque. So this should give you a fairly good idea why we choose the Gen 6 over the Gen 5 if we have a choice. But for the Gen 5 guys out there, let's take a look and see what we can do with those peanut port heads, because especially if we're looking for more torque, they're actually a fairly good option. Okay guys, we took a look at our Gen 5 454 from the wrecking yard, and then what happened when we put a camshaft in it, and then we compared that to the Gen 6 stuff, both stock and with a cam. But now let's take a look and see what happened when we modified this thing. So this was our stock motor. It made 334 horsepower, 448 foot-pounds of torque. And to remind you, here's what happened when we put the mild camshaft in it. But here's what happened when we upgraded it even further, because I knew that there was a lot of potential left with the peanut port heads, and I wanted to retain those, and then eventually we would be replacing those with something else. But before we did that, I wanted to give the peanut port guys a shot. So here's what happened when we did our upgrades, and I'll go ahead and show you. So you can see we've got a lot more power, but the question is, how did we get that? So to give you an idea how much power, we went from our cammed version that made 380 horsepower roughly, 451 horsepower, and peak torque jumped up from 483 or 4 foot-pounds up to 548 foot-pounds. So we had a big jump in torque and power. And the thing that I liked is that we gained power everywhere. Now here's how we did it. The first thing we did was increase the static compression. We did that by replacing the factory dish pistons with a dome piston. So we put a 20cc dome piston in it that also had valve reliefs, because later on we would be using more camshaft in this combination, and we needed valve reliefs in order to do that. We also wanted to have more static compression. We wanted to get it up near 10-to-1 so that this thing could actually be making some power. Now we combined that with a bigger camshaft. In this case, we didn't go really big because we know we were retaining the peanut port heads, and we wanted the camshaft to be realistic for this combination. So we ran a 268 hydraulic flat tapping camshaft. I'll go ahead and put the specs up here. But again, you'll see, and from judging by the torque curve and where we made peak power, I mean, we made peak power in this combination at 4,900 RPM and made peak torque at 3,500 RPM. So this is still a fairly small camshaft for a 454, and it made good power and good torque, and it's definitely a street-driven type of camshaft. But we put the Extreme Energy 268 in, we increased the static compression, and we also did a little bit of porting on the peanut port heads. We took the heads to the guys over at L&R, and they put a bigger intake valve and a bigger exhaust valve. They did a minor surface cut on it just to make sure that it was flat. They did a valve job on it, and they also did some bowl work to get the thing to flow a little bit better. Now, they didn't open up the peanut ports to the size of a standard oval port, nothing like that. They just went in and took off all the rough surfaces, and like I said, mostly bowl work in there, and we saw some good gains. We retained the dual plane intake manifold and 750 carb and the same headers and distributor, and ran the combination with those modifications. As you can see, we picked up a lot of power. I mean, we picked up a lot of torque, and this thing made almost 500 foot-pounds at 2,500. We were at 493 foot-pounds. So again, almost 500 foot-pounds of torque at 2,500 RPM. This would be a really good towing motor and even a good street kind of motor in any kind of combination, a truck or Camaro or Chevelle, that kind of thing. But here's what happened if a guy is looking to get even more, and what I want you to notice when we show you this is what happened to this power, the low speed power down low. So here's what happened with our next combination. We got rid of the peanut port heads and installed an even bigger camshaft. We also installed a set of ProComp ported aluminum heads that had bigger valves. They flowed obviously an awful lot more, but we weren't taking advantage of everything that they had to offer because we were only making a little. This pushed our peak power up to 559 horsepower. Peak torque was actually not changed very much, 543 foot-pounds. And we also installed a much bigger camshaft on this, and that's what allowed the thing to go out there and rev. The camshaft was a Summit Racing flat tappet camshaft, 244, 248 at 50. And I'll go ahead and put the lift and duration up here and you guys can check it out. But it was obviously a much bigger camshaft in the Extreme Energy 268. That pushed peak power out here to 5,900 RPM. What I want you to take a look at though is take a look. We didn't change the peak torque very much. And we didn't even change actually where peak torque occurred very much. I mean, we're looking at 37 or 3,800 for peak torque. And we still have the big torque hump in it that I call. We did lose power, and we didn't run this thing down at below 2,500 RPM, which we could have. But we were losing torque even at 3,000 or 3,100. We were down 510 versus 542. So we were down about 32 foot-pounds down there. And I would expect, given how big the camshaft was, that we would probably lose even more. The heads, the aluminum ProComp heads or Speedmaster heads, flowed obviously quite a bit better than our even mildly ported peanut port heads. But the interesting thing is I didn't see a lot of torque loss, at least at 3,500 or so. Now down below that, you definitely would see it. So if you're going to tow something that that big camshaft would definitely not be the way to go. But the thing's still making pretty good power and pretty good torque. But if you want to tow stuff, don't count out the peanut ports. Let's get to our conclusion. Okay, guys, what did we learn from our little adventure with the peanut port big block Gen 5 motor? Obviously, they work fairly well, especially if you're looking for low speed power. The peanut ports, especially in modified form like we did, a little bit bigger valves, a little bit of porting, and away you go. They'll actually work very well for stuff, you know, 5,000 or 4,500 and below. You can make lots of torque, put the right camshaft in it, especially if you add static compression ratio. All of that stuff helps make pretty good power and pretty good torque. Now, do peanut ports make more torque than bigger heads? Probably not. Head flow is always a good thing, and as we've seen, if we put a set of 265 airflows on here, or Brodex heads or whatever, it's going to make more power than the little peanut port heads do. But if you already have your peanut ports, you can do a little bit of work and make good power. Armature holder, make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. I'll keep testing.